Hi everyone, and welcome to part 5 of the Etched brass soldering demos. Hope you're enjoying it, but most importantly I hope you're getting involved, and I hope you've got yourself some etched brass, even if it's just some bits and pieces of offcut. Get yourself some solder, a decent iron and flux, and you're having a little go. It really isn't hard, and hopefully some of the tips and tricks that I've been showing over the last 4 of these will really help you make some progress and not be worried about it. In the last episode, I talked about getting together photographs of the real thing, and actually I should have shown a real photo of the actual coach. This is the Vale of Rydal saloons. We're actually building this one. This is the observation end, which I've already built and is in primer as the prototype. So today we're going to be joining the body to the chassis. We're going to be adding these prominent steps, and we're going to be looking at how we're going to bend this roof to this radius and solder it on. So do get yourself together some photos. In time you might also want to make yourself a little drawing if you're out and about. Maybe take a tape measure if it's appropriate. Obviously tell the guard what you're doing, otherwise they'll probably think you're a bit odd. And you probably make a little drawing. So this is a drawing I made, it's upside down, a drawing I made of the interior. And you can see it has a slightly unusual set of seats inside. I actually had to search on Flickr for various internal photos that people have taken on their holidays to discover exactly what the bench seats look like on the end. Obviously, the best situation of all is to get yourself a drawing. I don't have a drawing of those, but I do have a drawing here of a Welsh pull and Llanfair Pickering, which I'm also making at the moment, and this can really help with looking at what's going on with those truss rods we talked about last week, exact dimensions, looking at what's happening with windows and window bars and things like that, where exactly the bogies are, things like that. And what we do sometimes find, particularly with these scratch aid kits that Worsley Works do, is that sometimes you'll find either errors in the kit, and they're usually minor, or we find ways where we could slightly improve the way the kit has been built for durability, for closeness to the prototype, or just because you want to add some additional detail. And we'll talk about some of that today. Okay, so I'm going to start today by talking about bogies. These are Vale of Rydal coaches, obviously need appropriate bogies. We're lucky because Dundas models already make the bogies for their older style saloon coach kits, so you can get these separately, and they come like this. They also have a little piece on the end which is for mounting the coupling. We'll come to that in a bit. I then use the Dundas models wheels. These are 6.2mm discs, so solid disc. I have in here a very important little jig or tool, if you like, which is a back-to-back gauge, and for this you can pop it. There's a little slot there, you can see, which you can pop onto the axle, and you can check that the wheels are exactly the correct back-to-back, and if not, you can either push them together or indeed act to move them out. I use the N gauge back-to-back, which I think from memory is about 7.3mm. I find that works well through pico points. There are other versions of back-to-backs you'll see all the time in 009. Some of them work okay through points, some don't. It's really a case of checking and going, but the benefit of these, given that they have a plastic centre, is you can easily move them along the axle. There are other wheels I've come across in 009 recently which don't have that ability because they're set with a shouldered axle, and if they don't run out of the box then you can have yourself some problems. So these are the best wheels, the Dundas ones which come with the kit, and you can check the back-to-back, and of course if you accidentally knock it you can look at that as well. Now these are set into little indentations, little axle box indentations, you can just see there. I often just use a little pin vice and drill just to gently take a tiny amount more out. You find that there's a bit of flash in the hole sometimes. It may not quite have moulded exactly circular or deep enough, and I just feel it's worth getting in there and just clearing out those holes. You probably only need 3 or 4 turns with a decent drill in the chuck there either side, and then you can test these. I mean, these are really great because the sides just bend apart, so given it's injection molded plastic, and you can pop them in and see if they rotate. And if they rotate when you spin with your finger and they keep going for a second or two after, then you know, in fact it's still going now, then you know that's happy days. What you may find is that they stick a little bit, and there are a couple of things you can do about that. Both of those are actually fine. The other thing you could do is on a piece of glass just check that it freely rolls from side to side like that, and you know, if it doesn't roll at all, or if it only rolls a short distance, then you know you've probably got to go in and give that another go. But that is absolutely superb, so we are happy with that one. I've got another one here. I will not do the clearing out and just see if that's actually okay as well. Didn't actually need the clearing out. And this one here, now see that one doesn't rotate, so you might be able to see, I'll bring it close to the camera, this one is rotating beautifully, it's still rotating now, happy days. This one is not rotating at all, so if we put this on the glass you'll find it just doesn't go anywhere. So we can do a couple of things about that. The first is what the thing I mentioned a minute ago, which is to clear it out, and that one doesn't look terribly deep, so I'll give that a little wiggle. And on both sides. Okay, can clear that out. And the second thing I do, and you have to be very careful with this because you don't want to overdo it, but you'll find that the wheels, the ends of the axles are pinpoint, and some of these are exceptionally sharp, and they can act to kind of dig themselves into the plastic and therefore not rotate. So I, with a file, just like we've talked about before, I just take 1 or maybe 2 tiny pieces off that end just to make it less sharp. And whilst I've done that, we've actually been able to find another problem we find. So the plastic centres of these wheels and the steel tyres, which are here, over time will loosen and come away. I think it's just an age thing. They're fine, but what you'll then find is that this will derail, it will go out of gauge, it'll hit a check rail or something, and you'll have all kinds of problems. So I'm just going to use a tiny amount of super glue. I use this Rocket Rapid stuff, but other versions are just as good. I just have got used to this. There's also a blue version of this Rocket which doesn't set as fast. Sometimes use that as well, but Rocket Rapid, the yellow one is my favoured one, and I will just show a little tip I've got here at the same time. Let's not drop here. Obviously, I'm sure many of you enjoy a curry or a Chinese takeaway, that kind of thing. Wash out the little containers you get and use them as little glue or paint bases, if you like. And you can then quite easily pop or decant, if you like, a little blob of super glue onto there, and then using a cocktail stick. And the same would be true if you had, say, 2-part epoxy, which you'd then mix together. And this week, actually, whilst we're breaking news, I've bought this stuff, DivCon 2-ton epoxy. I'm told it's extremely good, strong hold, bit of time to move stuff about. It does not weigh 2 tons, I'm not sure what that's about. I think it's about strength, actually. But I will be using that in future videos, and we'll see how we get on. So all I do with the wheel is just take a tiny amount on a cocktail stick, and I'll bring this close to the camera so you can see it. I would just pop a little bead on, and then perhaps even using the other end of the cocktail stick, just make sure it's gone all the way around the wheel centre, so the rim, if you like. And then we can quickly pop on, of course, because it will set if we don't get this right. So pop it on like that, and using my pliers, just go around, rotating the wheel, and just checking that the tyre and the centre are aligned and that their backs are level, and therefore the glue will then sit between the centre and the tyre, and that will then not move off again once it's set. You can then probably reuse the cocktail stick several times, but what you will find is if you do have little blobs of glue on lids like that, or just generally on your workbench, you do need to make sure if you finish with that glue you wipe it up, otherwise you can be sure that you'll accidentally put your wrist or your hand into it at some point and accidentally either glue yourself or glue to a model or damage the paint on a model later. So we can get rid of that now, up there, and obviously put the top on the glue. So there we go, we've repaired the wheel and rim problem, and now we can try this wheel back into the bogie, and there you go, it rotates beautifully because we deepened the holes. We've taken a little bit off the end with the file, and now if I use that it will beautifully run. So rolling resistance of the train will be limited. That means you can run longer trains as well, and it should work beautifully through points. What I usually do then is just get myself a turnout, Pico standard turnout, and just check it through the frogs and the check rails. It should be fine, but it's always a bit of extra benefit. And then finally, one other little tip is that you can get a attachment for a Dremel, or indeed that little nail device I talked about last week, version 4 of this video, and you pop that on the end, and it's a kind of polishing device. It doesn't harm the wheel, doesn't scratch the wheel, but it's good enough that it will get dirt off the wheel. Now obviously you can go in with a knife or a scraper or something and take off any dirt that's got onto wheels, but actually I just find getting that Dremel in and letting the wheel rotate, because the Dremel itself is rotating. I'll try and show this on a future video actually, because it's probably easier to see it rather than me attempt to explain what I'm talking about. But basically using that to quickly clean these wheels up, and that will help, because otherwise if you've got dirt on these wheels, even though it's a carriage, that will get onto the main rail and then ultimately into your locos and onto pickups and things like that, and you'll have issues. So there we go, they are the bogies. They will go onto our bogie pivots that we did in episode 1 or 2, I can't remember, and they have a hole through them, through the middle, their own pivot hole you can see there. We will put a 10BA machine screw and a little washer on the end there. That will then sit on top of the pivot. We'll have to think about the couplings, but let's get the end on first and then work out how that's going to work alongside the ends. And we also need to think about the height above the rail that the coupling will sit, because we want to try and standardize that as much as possible, and it's surprisingly low. And we'll then also probably put a little bit of extra suspension, because what you can see is that because we're sat on top of a single 10BA nut, that you'll find the whole coach, once it's together, particularly with its etched brass roof, will wobble from side to side. And although a little bit of wobble is prototypical, if you watch real coaches, in model form it amplifies it, and therefore what I do is I get a plumber's O-ring that I put around the pivot there. That then sits on it and it acts as a little bit of suspension, which I think just happens to work very, very well. I've not actually seen anyone else do that, but I've adopted it as my preferred method, and it does seem to work well. Now earlier in the intro to this video I alluded to the fact that sometimes these kits can have slight errors in them, and I'm afraid we have one on this. So you'll remember we have our chassis, we have our body that we made last week, two go on top of each other, but we need to link the two together. So we'll put it on a nice bit of brass there. Get the that strengthening strip inside both of the ends. I'll do it with one hand, and the outer ends outside the kind of girded side. So we know it's going to sit like that because it's on a nice piece of straight glass. I know that's all gravy. I'm then expecting to be able to put this strengthening, I still don't have a name for it, bracket in the end there. But what I noticed was that it was very wide. And so I looked again at the available space, use this cocktail stick to show you, between here and here, which is where the bracket can sit, because obviously the outside of the box of the coach will sit around the outside. And when I compared the width of the bracket to the width of the body, you'll see that it's about 1 mil too wide, i.e. it overlaps by about 1 mil there. That means these brackets are, at least for the way I'm building it, too wide. So unfortunately we've already soldered them up. So I wanted to show you what I would do about that. It's actually quite useful to know that. Now we could take a saw to it and saw down both sides. We want to equalize both sides so that we don't get it wobbly, and it's got to line up with this hole in the chassis. We could try and that would work, but it would probably take a while, particularly sawing through the horizontal piece here of the brass. It would work though. We could try and immediately cut it, but what's going to happen there is this is going to deform backwards and it's going to go out of square and it's all going to be a bit of a kerfuffle. So what I do instead is I take a kind of, and I have had to do this on other kits as well, is I take a kind of diagonal approach into the corner and cut it right at the corner so that we keep this edge straight, and that then gives me a bit of space to go in and take off the last millimetre or so. And you may very slightly deform it. You can go with some pliers if you do, but the strength of the soldered fillet will remain. You may find there's a tiny bit of solder that just stays in the corner there, and we can just file that around. But it's an easy way just to quickly take off. I mean, we're talking about 0.5 mil each end. And I just find that by adding that first diagonal cut, you've then got yourself access here to go up. If you didn't do that, then this would bend outwards and it would all go into problems. So I will do the others and then we'll come back and see how this is going to work. Okay, so I've done one complete bracket which now has these diagonal ends, and I've done the other. Worth just saying as well, on the other part you're better off starting at the back and making the diagonal cut towards the front. It doesn't matter that the two diagonals are exactly the same angle because you won't see it, but it does just give you that ability to go in and take off that annoying little 0.5 mil or so. And then if we put these back, I've done a really good job on that one as it happens, I can line up the bolt over the hole and just check that we no longer have any extension beyond the edge of this little piece of brass, which we don't. So we can now go back in, pop the body back over the side, and if I use some tweezers, actually place that then back over, and as you can see now it fits, but in the previous way it didn't. And those kind of little minor dimensional errors are something you just need to be aware of as you build these kits. I don't think any kit is ever totally perfect. This kit is very, very good. You know, I like the way the drop lights work, the sides are beautiful, the way the tab and slot fits on the chassis is very, very nice. You get your own roof with its rain strips already, so there are many great things, the checker plate on the steps, etc., about this kit, but unfortunately somehow, either because of the way I'm building it, which seems unlikely because I'm putting the sides outside the ends, which makes it as wide as possible at the end. So I can't imagine there's no other way to make more room for it, so it must be an error. Right, so back to soldering. We've got the iron nicely heating up there. We've now got these bracket pieces placed inside, and of course the easy bit now is to make sure they're nicely lined up, because we can see down inside to check that you can see through a hole in the base. Now some people would actually put a cocktail stick or something like that in there as well, just to check it. I actually don't do that on this occasion. We've used cocktail sticks before for making the captive nuts, but I actually find that because I've got these long clips, these are the longer versions, I can actually get in with the clip here and nicely clip the end to the bracket. I'll bring this up to the camera so you can see. There. So this nice long clip which gets in and takes the top of the bracket. The other one, top of the bracket. Oh yeah, that's probably the best view, and ensure that the captive nut that's on the bracket is on top of the hole. We're doing this all on a nice piece of glass. Keep it all nice and straight, and I will just make myself some room. Often find that actually giving yourself a bit of room around the work that you're doing and clearing up, I know a little bin near you, just to give yourself a bit of breathing space. You know, your arms and elbows and that kind of thing are surprisingly large radius or whatever just around you. Good, so we've got this in place. Now the important things to check are that the whole coach itself is flat, so the chassis is on the ground, the sides are on the ground, the ends are outside, the sides are outside their strengthening pieces, and the hole is central and bang over the hole, which it is. So we're happy. Then we can get our flux out. Barry Stevenson's liquid flux from Slater's, 9% phosphoric, as we've said several times. Manky brush, and just get in there without knocking the piece you've clamped. And either side of the clamp, I'm not going to do it all, I'm just going to do either side of the clamp. Pop a bit of flux in. Iron, going to use the other cleaning, it's kind of like golden thready stuff in a magnetic, as it turns out, box thing there. It also has a kind of stand, and this would be a cheap kind of stand for your soldering iron, although not a particularly safe one, I would suggest. So a bit yeah, not the best. I think a proper stand like this is more important. So we've got ourselves a nice clean tip. We're up at 400 degrees. I'll pop the soak absorber on just for safety, and then we'll just get ourselves a tiny bit of solder, pop it on, tack it on, let it solidify, then we can remove the clamp and do the rest of the joint. All right. So not very pretty, but I've just plopped on a couple of pieces of the solder. We can then take the clamp off, and like I say, not very pretty at all, not meant to be. I just popped a couple of pieces of solder there just to keep it nice and square. Now we can of course go in and just check that it all looks square in that dimension as well, which it does. But I would always go back and then pop a bit more flux on. I don't think you can have too much flux. So we can pop that in there. Now what we don't want to do, as before, is undo what we've done, but we've got it both sides. So we've got two pieces, two kind of tacks, if you like, either side, 1, 2. So we can work on one, let that go to liquid, and drag it out, then let it solidify, then work on the other, and then at all times it will be clamped in place. Probably don't actually need any more solder because there's plenty on there. So I'm just gonna let this work. And let it flow. I like to let it flow down the sides as well, because that just gives it a bit of extra strength if we can. There we go, I've done one side. I'll show you, easiest to show in distance. And then I'm going to let that solidify, and now I can do the other side. And there's plenty of solder on there, just let it, you'll hear the kind of buzz of the flux heating up, and then we can nicely, I'm going to try and make it look as pretty as possible for the video purposes, but you don't need to. Just get a bit of solder down the sides as well, and you'll find that that is a very strong joint, and you need it to be strong, you know, we don't want it to be any kinds of rubbish. There we go. Right, so now you can see, hopefully, that I've taken those two blobs of solder that we had before. Let's see if I can get this up the camera. There we go. That's probably the best angle. And it's now all the way across, and that bracket I can hold the whole coach by, and that is going nowhere. And we now have, if we pop back the chassis, we have one end a nice bracket, and we can see through here that you can see the thread of the nut available. Another little minor thing which you might find in these kits is that although this hole is oval, sometimes it doesn't quite exactly fit. On this occasion it does, but you may find that the whole coach starts to bow outwards in the middle, kind of like there, and that will be because the whole thing's too tight, and you may want to get a little needle file in and just extend that oval shape hole there just a little bit more, and we're talking 0.25 of a mil or something. It really isn't a lot, but just to take maybe the cusp of the etch off and just give it a little bit more space. I think it's going to be okay with this one. It's close. You can obviously try with putting a 10BA bolt in and see how it is, and fiddle about and fettle it if you like. So I'm going to do the other end, and then I'll actually show you how we're going to fettle that with a needle file a little bit if we need to. I'll get the appropriate needle file out. Okay, so let's come in close so we can see what we've done. So under here, of course, we've now got the brackets which are keeping the chassis and the body together, and we can see here the hole, and there's that oval shaped piece, and we can see through to where the nut, the thread of the nut is underneath, and you can see, we can see 95% of the nut's thread, but I think we would probably find if we popped a machine screw in there, it would tighten up and then the end would bow out. So we're going to go in there, and we're going to, there's the end brackets nicely soldered on, and we can see the soldered fillet there. I haven't cleaned it up yet. I'll get in there with a file or two. So here's a set of needle files, and these are just cheap ones I picked up somewhere, and this is the one we want. It is kind of circular section, so it's not going to cut any part of the hole in any particular way more than another part. It's just going to make a longer hole, if you like, and we'll use this to get into that hole and just slightly extend it. So we're going to pop this in, and we're going to go up and down, up and down, up and down in there, and that will allow this oval to just extend a little bit to the left and this side to the right. So it really is as simple as getting the right file and popping it into the hole, and you can hear it obviously as the brass comes away, making sure that we extend the hole the same on both sides. So we're getting into there and just giving it little bit. We don't actually on this occasion need to do an awful lot, and I've probably done enough already. But on other kits, maybe the hole being completely the wrong place, then you're into probably drilling a smaller pilot hole, making sure it's in the right place, and it's also easier to drill a smaller hole, and then getting in with a bigger drill and extending it, widening it when we're ready. So I'm going to do the same the other end, just a little bit. Doesn't need an awful lot now, but it will just avoid the sides of that coach being bowed out. And once we've done that, which I think I'm happy with, I'm just going to use a flat file just to check there aren't any cuspy bits that have come through that will avoid anything. So if we then pop that back on, you never seem to be able to do this on camera. It's the pressure of the fact that you're all watching me. There we go. Happy days. Right, now we can see through that the hole is 100% covering of the holes. And then I have, and in fact in the last couple of weeks, I have decided to get myself a small storage jar here, tray here, and I've used a Sharpie to label each of the sizes of 10BA bolts because I use so many of them. Now for these end pieces, we're going to choose a countersunk bolt. On this occasion, bolt machine screw. Countersunk means that, I would imagine most people know, but I'll just quickly say that the head has got a kind of diagonal drop down so that it can sit within a flat surface. The other types are cheese head, which have a chunky cheese head which sits above. And the reason we want to use a countersunk is just because I'm a little bit concerned that it might start to foul coupling or maybe even the bogie if it's close enough. Okay, so we're going to use some not very long machine screws because we don't need to poke them through very much, and the longer they are, the more obvious they will be in the interior and the more they'll affect kind of seats and that kind of thing that we've got on the inside. And I'm going to use steel because I'm not going to need to solder the actual brass to anything. So I can actually magnetize my screwdriver rather than have to use the tacky wax. So I've got a kind of magnetizer here, which you've got to magnetize one side, demagnetize the other, and I can then pop my screwdriver down and magically magnetize the little machine screw, which just makes it a bit easier to keep it in the slot. Pop it in and gently, a little bit of pressure, just start to screw it in. We've already used our tap on the inside of the captive nut, so it should go in like butter as it does. And because it's countersunk, I really hope you can see, it really doesn't protrude very far at all and shouldn't interfere with couplings and that kind of thing. And it went in. Okay, so let's talk about making the bends in roofs. Now these are some specialist equipment called rolling bars. You can, using these two knobs here, you can set the thickness of metal that's going to be going through, and you then pull round this handle. The bars go round, you can see the cogs there, and they will act to bend the brass or any other metal. This one actually has some grooves here, so you've got to stay away from that end, otherwise it will put patterns in the brass, not good news. So we always stay this end. And we can take ourselves a piece of 10 thou, which is what I generally use, brass, pop it in like this, keeping it parallel. I'm doing this with one hand, but then you would use one hand on there and the second hand to rotate it, and it will drop down and it will make a very nice radius bend. So that's the roof for Bob. Now this of course didn't come in the kit, so in a minute I'm going to show you how I cut out the brass to make a roof like that before we bend it. If you don't have rolling bars, and I guess few people do, although you may have a friend who has them, then what we need is a piece of metal, could be a leg or a stick or something, as long as it's the same diameter and circumference, around its length, and certainly the length of the brass you want to bend, then that's fine. And then you can just go in, keep it nice and straight along the way, and then with your fingers literally just bend the brass over equally all the way along. Bit of fiddling here and there. It won't be as perfect as putting them through rolling bars, but it will get you a good bend. One other tip we're going to need to talk about is, so in fact it's the case with these Vale of Rydal roofs, is that these are made from very thin brass. This is probably 5 thou, and this struggles to retain its bend, so we're actually probably going to anneal this first. That means to heat it up. The brass will change colour slightly, go darker, but it will then be much easier to bend. Obviously we're going to have to do that over something like a gas hob, or using a butane gas blowtorch type thing, and of course it will get hot, so you're going to have some tongs or something to hold it whilst we do that. We're not going to bend it as it's hot, we're just going to make it hot and then heat it up and then let it cool, and then we can come back and bend it over through the bars, or using that method I just talked about by finding a nice tube or something. So we can literally look around and see, here's a lighting tube, maybe that would be a good enough radius for something you're going to bend. Over here I've got, as it happens on the back of my layout here, I've got quite a substantial tube that you might see as a leg in a kitchen or something, and you might just be able to get in and do something there. It's those kind of things you're looking for. So let's talk about how we would make a roof if it didn't come in the kit. Now obviously this Vale of Rydal one did, which is great. I'm going to bend that in a bit, but if we didn't, and we need to get ourselves a piece of sheet brass from somewhere like Eileen's Emporium, or most model shops have these kinds of things, you're looking for 10 thou brass that is thick enough that it will not deform, but not too thick that it's really hard to cut or bend. So I find 10 thou to be the perfect thickness, and it's very easy and simple to get hold of, but obviously it's not the right shape for your roof. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is to measure the length of the coach, just using a steel rule. I would always suggest that you build the body to this point before you actually measure it, and I would also just measure a little bit long. So I wouldn't make it absolutely bang on. So if it was bang on with a tiny amount of overlap, and if you look at prototype coaches, they do have a slight overlap for avoiding rain getting in panelling and stuff, then that would be 128. But I'm not going to go 128 now, I'm going to go 129, just to give myself a little bit of room in case the cut is slightly inside that, and later it's much easier to use something like a tin snip to just take a tiny amount off. I use a Sharpie with a small nib like that, and because you can wipe it off later, even permanent ink, then I'll just usually write on the brass to remind myself, because I'll forget whilst I'm trying to do this. Now of course we could use tin snips to cut this brass, and they would work perfectly fine, and you could get in and make that cut, but it's unlikely you're going to be able to get a perfect cut from one side to the other of something as long as a coach roof. Certainly some of my Welsh Highland coaches are even longer than this, and they're really, really long, and you've got to get it right. Otherwise you'll start to see wobbles on the roof, and weirdly a lot of model railways are viewed from the top, so roofs are actually surprisingly seen an awful lot more than they are in the reality of the prototype, because obviously you're at eye level, and you rarely look at the roof of a coach because you're below it. But from a model railway point of view, most of the time people are looking down. That, I think, by the way, is probably a good thing for disabled access and that kind of thing. I would point out, some people like to do this kind of eye level effect. That's great if you happen to be exactly 6 foot and able and well bodied, but if you're a child or you're in a wheelchair, completely useless exhibition. So I don't think these eye level layouts are the right thing at all, unless some other method is allowed for, like a ramp or something, to allow disabled or customers or children to have the same access as everyone else. Good. Let's have a little look then at what we do about the width. So the only issue we've got here, of course, is if we measure across the actual width, you will find that it is 24-ish. But we've got to allow for the fact that there's a radius here in the roof. And you could do some clever maths if you were so bothered. You could create a little paper template, put that piece of paper on top and check kind of widths. There are several other methods you could use. I would probably use the paper one, because then I've almost got a little paper attempt that you can trial along there and see if it's the right way. But I think because we know what this is needed to be, because we already have a roof, I'm just going to measure the roof just to make sure I get it right. So I will check that in fact it is 25. So the radius there is actually added about 1 millimetre. And we can check the roof that came with the kit on the actual kit just to check that that's correct. And it is. It gives a slight overlap, but nothing too bad. So we're going to go with 25. So we want 129 by 25. Fine. So we're going to not use the glass for this, or you probably could get away with it, but you might scratch it. We're going to use a cutting mat. This is a Model Craft one. My A4 one is actually died a death, so I'm waiting on a new one. This A5 one's just about big enough, but you probably want an A4 one. One little tip I do is that I've super glued a piece of glass paper, sandpaper type stuff, on the back of the steel rule. Why do I do that? Well, I've got another one here that does not have that. And what you'll notice is it's very, very slippy against the brass here and will move about. And as you're trying to cut or measure or draw, etc., it's going to move about. With the glass paper, you've got a lot more friction. It still moves about a little bit, but a lot more friction. So it's less likely to move about. Good, so we're going to measure this. Measure twice, cut once is the rule here. You've probably heard that in carpentry and other places. So be sure you've got it right and make that mark, and then check again. Try and make the mark, which of course will be wider than the actual mark on the ruler, in the middle of the position you actually want to cut. 25. And I do that at least 3 times along the way. And then you can look down them and just check you think that's right. Pop the ruler along and just sense check that the top edge of the brass and the ruler are parallel with each other, which they are. Right, so we've now got a line there. How are we going to cut it? So I'm not going to use tin snips because I just wouldn't be able to get a perfectly straight answer. I'm going to first of all use a scriber. So this is quite heavy actually. It's a heavy steel tool, but we're going to be holding this down really hard and exact, making sure it's bang on where we want it to be. And we're then going to scribe all the way along with a consistent feel a couple of times. The first one you need to be very wary and careful about. The next ones, as long as the ruler doesn't move, which is what the glass paper is helping with, can be a bit more confident, and you can start to push down and get a bit of a groove going on. Not a dance, just a groove in the brass. There we go. So 3 or 4. And what I've created then is a nice straight groove. But that's not the way to actually cut the brass. That's just going to mark a channel for this beast to go in. So this is called a skrorka, and it's an Olva, O-L-F-A, made in Japan, a PC-L, if that means anything to anyone. You get some spare blades in a little pocket thing here. And this will go in using this, again, the straight edge alongside it. Even though we've got a groove, I just leave the straight edge there as well. And then we're going to put the squawker in. Feel for the little groove. You can feel it's in. First one again, really nice and gently. Keep it nice and parallel, straight down. You notice I've reorientated this towards me because I feel that's an easier way of avoiding the blade going left or right. I'm mostly going to go to this side. And then we can just start to get a bit more confident and a bit deeper, and you'll start to see the swarf coming off of the cut brass. And keep doing it. It probably takes maybe 10 of these. The deeper you get in the groove, the less likely it is that the blade will move out of its position. So we can get a bit more confident in going with deeper and harsher cuts. Be aware the swarf is quite sharp, so go to the bin and just get rid of that before you accidentally get it in your fingers or something. And we can actually now see a pretty good line there. See that in the center? And you actually start to see it coming through on the other side, which is when you know that you're getting somewhere. Now I'm actually going to use a line that was already drawn here by me for a previous purpose, but I'm just going to check that it's square before I do that, because you never know why that line might have been previously drawn. It is square, so happy days. And I'm actually, because this is quite a short piece, I'm going to go in with the tin snips. I'm just going to gently go in, and I'm going to cut beyond where I want to stop. There we go. Now you could at this point probably bend back and forth, but I just kind of feel you still want to go a bit deeper with the squawker. You can't over squawk it, if that's the thing. I'm just going to get in and do a bit more squawking like this. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, and we can be sure it's gone through to the other side, and then we can gently start using our fingers all the way along. You've got to get the bend the same all the way along. You could keep squawking forever if you wanted to, and then we're going to bend it off. The one thing just to be careful of, I think I may even have got 0.5 millimeter of issue here, is the very first piece. And as long as you go beyond the end with your squawker, you're probably okay this end. The very first piece tends to not start right at the edge of the brass, because obviously you'd be starting off the piece, and that's unlikely to work very well. So you tend to find the first piece doesn't get as much squawk. So actually I go in and just take the first little millimeter off with some tin snips. Otherwise you might find you get a corner of the roof here, and it'll turn up here where you've got a little triangle piece that's missing. So we can go back and forth, and voila, one beautifully straight piece of brass. And we can then bend that. I've obviously made it way over length, but we can then go in with the tin snips, mark, check square, and cut that back as well, and that will become a roof if we didn't already have one. So I'm hoping that a future model will need this. You might find that the very edges just need your pliers to go in and just avoid them. They sometimes get slightly bent just because of the way we've done that, but that is a piece of brass ready to go, and shiny. So here's the Dremel I mentioned. This is actually a Rotorcraft 12 volts Dremel style multi-tool. Goes into the mains. It's single speed this. I actually have another which has a little knob you can change the speeds for. I use that for cutting. This one is just entirely for cleaning wheels. It was really cheap. I think I got it at a car boot sale for like £5 or £10 or something. Probably more like a £5. It comes with lots and lots of different attachments, but I just keep this brass haired kind of piece on the end there, and then I just use it to clean wheels like that and let them freely rotate in their axles as you do it. Easy. You can obviously use this to do loco wheels, but they won't rotate in the same way, so you will need to gently remove a bit, then use some power on the loco to move the wheel round. So you're probably going to use something which sits on the track and allows you to clean the wheels as the wheels rotate under power. So really this is for wagons and carriages, but I find it pretty useful, and yeah, good little tool. So to do some annealing, you could use a gas hob. We don't have that. We have an auger here at home, so I can't really use that. So I'm going to use a butane torch, flame gun, whatever you call it. You get a camping gas style piece to put on the bottom and a blowtorch thing to go on the top. There's a cap to avoid it accidentally going off. Obviously got a bit of a stink to it as well. But it just literally goes on like that. And you just got to be really, really careful. So I'm going to do this outside because obviously the gas can ignite, and we don't want to damage any models, etc. But it has a regulator on this side, so you can change the length of the flame and a trigger there, so we can get it going. I'll show it just quickly here. There you go. And I can turn it off like that as well. So this is the kind of colour that the brass goes after being annealed. You just literally heat it with a blowtorch for a few seconds, keeping the flame moving, and then let it cool, and then you can bend it far more easily. And we've got a nice bend in this, which wouldn't have been possible pre-annealing. The final job today are the little steps. So these come like this, checker plate with a tiny fold up piece, half etched line to the inside as usual. There are 3 little tabs and little sections of fresh air in between, so we can just use, no need for hold and fold for this kind of thing, just use the flat nose pliers and get them to 90 degrees. Really hard for me to show you this, but they're 90 degrees. Now there are 3 on each side, 6 in all, and I took the decision, I just mentioned this in the first of these series, that I'd actually not do it as per the prototype, and that's for strength. So if you look at the prototype here, hopefully you can see that there are tiny brackets that hold these steps away from the girder underframe, and I just don't think they'd be very strong. So I have actually, on the prototype here, soldered those directly to that girded underframe, and you can hardly tell the difference. If you were a Vale of Rydal expert, you might notice, and even then I think it's going to be marginal, because you've still got the 90 degree bend that does hold it lower than the underframe girder. It just doesn't quite have those brackets, but it is far, far stronger. I mean, these steps here are not going anywhere once they're soldered. So we need to reinforce the 90 degree bend, and then we need to solder it onto the underframe. Now there's no tabs, no slots to help us here, and we've got to be very careful we don't get solder into the checker plate piece as well. So I'm actually going to reinforce the fold from the rear first. We'll use a tiny little cocktail stick to show this. Here we've got the 90 degree bend, just about see there. It's so small it's hard to show you, but we're then going to pop some solder just to reinforce the rear of those. We don't want it to go through to the checker plate, so we're talking about tiny amounts of solder. I didn't do this job first because it needs a little bit more care with the iron. Tiny amounts of flux put on gently in exactly the right place, and then a small amount of solder on the iron, so that you're literally just tapping. Quick little bzz from the flux burning, and that should be enough to not have solder through on the other side of the checker plate, but put enough on to reinforce that fold. And then once we've done that, and there are 6 of those to do, we will then solder on the long edge onto the base of the chassis. Now, it is best to do this once you've got the sides bolted to, so the body bolted to the chassis, because you need to line up these steps with the doors, obviously, and it's no use having them in the wrong place, or indeed misaligned, because it will look very obvious, because the doors are on a basic coach like this are really the main thing you see on the side of the coach. So I'm going to bend these and reinforce them, and then we'll come back to explain how to add them to the underside, because there's no help. So we're probably going to use a bit of blue tack or some clever balancing, and I will come back to that in a minute. So here's the annealed roof. Don't worry about the fact that you get weird patterns. They're quite pretty actually on the brass from the heat. That's fine. Once we've painted this, you won't see any of that. And yeah, they're kind of like rainbow coloured in a sense. It gives you enough to know that the brass has changed. And I'm sure when I did chemistry at school, there was some explanation with the way the atoms line up or something, but I can't remember what it is. But basically the annealing allows it to be more bendy and to stay bent as well. So that's certainly worth doing on particularly this really thin 5 thou brass that we've got here. And the crucial thing is just getting a good radius the whole way down, which we've managed there. So next week we'll be able to solder that on. So there we go, 3 tiny pieces of solder with 3 blobs of flux. That's all it needs just to give it a bit of extra strength. Okay, so best option here is use a Sharpie to mark on the base of the chassis here where the door edges are. That'll help us align the step with it. Tiny bit of flux on there, and then I've used some various weights and bits and pieces I have around, including a battery, to try and hold the carriage so it doesn't wobble so much. And then I will hold, using the reverse action pliers, the step broadly right, dab on a bit of solder, and then it's very much down to how I lux it. If it goes in first time, bang, then happy days, we can solder the rest on. If not, then we've only put a little bit of solder and we can use it to reheat, remelt, and reposition the step. Right, I'm doing this on video. Let's see what happens. Having enough space for your hands is one of the issues. I'm having to get around. Yes, maybe this solder's actually just going to be in the way, so we'll use the battery and the set square. Right, here we go. Wait till it sets, solidifies, before you move the tweezers too much, otherwise it will rip it off. So it's actually gone on in the middle. It's actually gone on the edge, but the other side of the step has slightly bent itself away. So what I think we're going to have to do is hold that down and really quickly just remelt the other end, so that takes some of the pressure, felt it click then, off that join, which it has done. Right, so now we're square along the end of the chassis. We need to bend it up slightly because it's almost poking down. I think that's going to need me to re-melt again, and just, I'll be really careful not to burn my fingers, but that's too far, unbelievable. There we go. And that's actually pretty much bang on now. And I'm happy with that. Then we can go in with a bit more flux. Check we're happy for sure. All ends, up, down, along, and round, about, every way. And then we do not want to melt the solder we've already got on. So we'll go on the other end, pop on a piece, and then we can go into the middle. And we have a step on. Now these are not easy, there's no doubt, and you've got to do 6 for each carriage. Maybe they could have been tab and slot, and then you'd have perhaps had a little tab there that you'd had to file out inside the girder, and maybe fill later. But it's difficult for any kind of kit designer, to be completely fair to Worsley Works, to make that work. But it is doable. You just have to not expect to get it right first time. It's probably going to need 2 or 3 attempts of repositioning. Sometimes you might just have to take the whole thing off, clean it up again, go and have a cup of tea, come back, more flux, and it'll probably go on fine. Sometimes just having a break, go and have a bacon sandwich or something, and then come back and try another time. The reason I say bacon sandwiches is because that's exactly what I just did. So there's 2 on, 2 6 done. Let's carry on, and I'll show you when it's finished. So the 6th one went on okay, actually, as it goes. So I do have another coach today, so it'll probably be the 12th that will be difficult. We shall see. But there we go. It's all 6 on using that kind of touch and go method. And so we now have a really lovely looking saloon coach. So we've made some excellent progress today in part 5. We've got those pesky steps on. We've looked at the roofs and how to bend them, how to cut them out of brass if you don't get one in the kit, how to anneal and bend them over using a tube or rolling bars if you can get access to them. We've looked at free running wheels and making sure the back to back is right, and also cleaning them. And we've got those brackets on the end and shown how sometimes there can be errors in the kit that you need to get across. Next week we will look at soldering the roof onto the body. This is something I personally put off for a long time, thinking it would be really complicated and difficult, and once I got going with it, realized that actually it wasn't. It was really not too bad at all, and you can really make some fast progress with that. Once we've got the roof onto the coach, we've already got the chassis ready, we've made the bogies now. We just need an interior and then some detailing on the outside, and we are pretty much there, plus the couplings. So we'll also start to look at what we're going to do in terms of cleaning it, ready for primer and ultimately painting it. So I hope you're having a go. Please do get yourself a kit. Worsley Works have a really good website if you want to get hold of these Vale of Rydal coaches. Then I'm sure Alan will be happy to help, and you can have a go, and I do hope you will. Thanks. See you in a week.